Before the first light ever broke through the darkness, before space stretched, before time began to move, before matter formed into stars and galaxies, what existed? This question sits at the edge of both science and philosophy, but it reaches even deeper into the realm of theology. Was there truly nothing, or was there a form of reality that simply cannot be perceived by human senses? And if such a reality existed, could it still exist now, hidden beneath everything we see? These questions challenge a common assumption, that the visible universe is the totality of existence. But what if what we perceive is only the surface layer of something far more profound? If you find questions like these compelling, questions about existence, purpose, and the unseen foundations of reality, consider subscribing to the channel and following along. Each exploration builds on the last, gradually uncovering deeper layers of meaning that often go unnoticed in everyday life. The central thesis that emerges from this line of thought is both simple and radical. Before the visible universe came into being, there existed an invisible realm, a dimension of reality not bound by physical laws, not measurable by instruments, and not accessible through the senses. What we call the universe today may not be the beginning, but rather the manifestation of a deeper, pre-existing order. In this view, the material world is not the foundation of reality, but its expression. This invisible realm is not defined by shape, size, or structure. It has no physical form that can be described, no coordinates that can locate it, and no temporal sequence that governs it. Time, as we understand it, a progression from past to future, does not apply. Space, with its dimensions and distances, does not confine it. It is a mode of existence fundamentally different from the physical universe. Not nothing, but something beyond the categories through which humans typically understand reality. Within this invisible foundation, theological tradition identifies several key realities. At the center is God, the ultimate source of all existence. God is not a being within the universe, nor a component of it. Rather, the universe itself is understood to exist because of God's will. This places God outside the constraints of space and time, not as a distant observer, but as the sustaining ground of all that is. Absolute, unbounded, and not subject to change or limitation, God represents a form of existence that does not depend on anything else. Alongside this divine source are beings often described as angels. Unlike physical creatures, angels are not composed of matter. They do not possess bodies, nor are they bound by biological processes such as growth, decay, or death. Instead, they are understood as purely spiritual entities, possessing intellect and will, capable of awareness and intention. Their role is not self-serving. Rather, they are oriented toward the divine, acting as agents or messengers within the spiritual order. In many traditions, they are seen as participating in the unfolding of reality, not through physical force, but through alignment with divine purpose. Closely related to this is the concept of the human soul. While the body is visible, measurable, and subject to time, the soul is described as its invisible counterpart, the deepest essence of a person. It is not merely consciousness or emotion, but the enduring core of identity. Unlike the body, which eventually deteriorates, the soul is understood to be indestructible. It does not cease when biological life ends, but continues to exist in a different dimension of reality. This gives human existence a dual structure, one part anchored in the material world, the other rooted in the invisible. This raises a critical implication. If the soul is eternal, then human actions carry consequences beyond the physical domain. Choices are not confined to immediate observable outcomes. They shape the condition of the soul, influencing its orientation toward or away from the divine source. In theological terms, this is often expressed through the concepts of heaven and hell, not as physical locations, but as states of being. One represents union with the source of existence, the other separation from it. Taken together, These elements form a coherent framework. The invisible world is not secondary or fictional, it is foundational. It precedes the material universe and gives rise to it. The visible world, with its complexity and structure, is not random, but reflects an underlying order that originates beyond physical reality. From this perspective, existence flows from the unseen to the seen, from intention to manifestation, from spiritual reality to material form. This framework also redefines the position of human beings. Humans are not merely physical organisms navigating a material environment. They exist at the intersection of two dimensions, the visible and the invisible. The body participates in the physical world, while the soul remains connected to the deeper, unseen foundation. This dual nature gives human life a unique significance. Every thought, decision, and action operates on two levels simultaneously, producing effects in the external world while also shaping the internal, spiritual condition of the individual. Understanding reality in this way shifts the interpretation of everyday life. Events are no longer isolated or purely material. They are expressions of a deeper structure. Meaning is not imposed from the outside, but emerges from the connection between visible actions and invisible principles. Life becomes more than a sequence of random occurrences. It becomes a coherent narrative, rooted in a foundation that extends beyond what can be seen. In the end, the question is not simply whether an invisible world exists, but whether we are willing to consider that what we see is only part of a much larger reality. If the visible universe is indeed the expression of something deeper, then understanding that deeper layer is essential to understanding existence itself. If the visible universe is not the ultimate foundation of reality, then a deeper question naturally emerges. Is the universe truly the beginning of everything, or is it the moment when something hidden begins to appear? This is the core of the metaphysical inquiry. What we call the beginning may not be an absolute origin, but rather a point of transition, a threshold where the invisible becomes visible. From this perspective, the universe is not the first layer of existence, but the first layer we are capable of perceiving. This reframing changes how we interpret existence itself. Instead of asking how something came from nothing, the question becomes, how does what is unseen become seen? How does a reality beyond space, time, and matter give rise to a structured, measurable universe? The answer, within this theological framework, lies in a fundamental principle. Existence flows from will into form. In other words, what is material is not self-originating. It is the expression of an underlying intentional order. The transition from the invisible to the visible is not described as a random explosion or an uncontrolled emergence, but as a deliberate unfolding. It begins not with matter, but with intention. Before there is structure, there is will. Before there is form, there is meaning. The invisible realm, defined by its lack of physical constraints, operates through a different kind of causality, one that does not rely on force or interaction in the physical sense, but on the realization of purpose. From this viewpoint, the material universe can be understood as the externalization of an internal reality. What exists in the invisible dimension, order, intention, structure, gradually manifests in forms that can be observed. This is not a transformation from nothing into something, but from hidden to revealed, from potential to actual, from essence to expression. The visible world becomes a kind of language through which the deeper, invisible order is communicated. This transition is symbolically captured in the structured narrative of the 7 days of creation. Rather than being interpreted strictly as a chronological sequence of 24-hour periods, these days can be understood as stages in the emergence of order from chaos, each step building upon the previous one. The sequence reveals a logic, from the most fundamental distinctions to increasingly complex forms of existence. The first stage begins with light. Let there be light is more than the introduction of illumination. It represents the establishment of the first distinction. Before this moment, everything is described as formless and void, a state without differentiation. Light introduces separation. It creates a boundary between what is revealed and what remains hidden, between order and non-order. The distinction between light and darkness is not merely physical, but conceptual. It marks the beginning of structure. With this division, the first rhythm is established, day and night, laying the foundation for time itself. The second stage introduces space. The separation of waters and the formation of the sky symbolize the creation of a structured environment. What was once undifferentiated is now divided into layers. This is the emergence of dimension, the creation of room for existence to unfold. Space is not simply emptiness, it is the condition that allows movement, relationship, and distinction between entities. Without space, nothing can exist in relation to anything else. This stage transforms a unified, indistinct reality into a structured framework. The third stage shifts from structure to stability. The gathering of waters and the dhuhr of dry land represent the formation of a foundation. Land provides a stable platform upon which further development can occur. Immediately following this, vegetation appears, plants, trees, and all forms of basic life. This is the first introduction of self-propagating systems, life that grows, reproduces, and sustains itself. The universe is no longer just structured, it becomes productive. It begins to generate complexity from within. The fourth stage introduces the regulation of time. The sun, moon, and stars are not merely sources of light, they function as markers. They establish cycles, days, seasons, years. If the first stage created the concept of time through the separation of light and darkness, this stage organizes time into a predictable system. Rhythm becomes measurable. The universe is no longer only structured and alive, it is now ordered in a way that allows consistency and anticipation. This predictability is essential for the development of life and the emergence of meaning. The fifth stage marks the expansion of life into movement. Creatures of the sea and birds of the sky fill the domains established earlier. Life is no longer stationary, it becomes dynamic. Movement introduces a new dimension of existence, freedom within structure. These living beings interact with their environment, occupy different levels of space, and begin to form ecosystems. The universe becomes active, filled with motion and diversity. The sixth stage reaches a critical turning point, the creation of land animals and, ultimately, human beings. Here, something fundamentally new appears: consciousness. While previous forms of life exist and move, humans are described as possessing awareness, the ability to reflect, to choose, and to understand. This is not just another step in biological complexity, it represents a qualitative shift. Humans are portrayed as bearing the image of the divine, not in physical form, but in their capacity for reason, moral judgment, and intentional action. For the first time, the universe contains a being capable of observing itself, questioning its own existence, and seeking meaning beyond immediate survival. This moment completes the visible structure of creation. The universe now contains order, space, stability, life, time, movement, and consciousness. Each stage builds upon the previous one, forming a coherent system rather than a random collection of elements. The progression reflects a movement from simplicity to complexity, from abstraction to embodiment. The seventh stage, however, introduces something different. It is not a stage of creation, but of completion. The concept of rest here does not imply fatigue, but fulfillment. The work is finished because the structure is complete. Everything that needed to exist has been brought into being, and it exists in a state of order. This stage also introduces the idea of sanctification, of setting something apart as meaningful. Time itself is given a dimension beyond function. It becomes sacred. This final step reveals that creation is not only about producing a universe, but about establishing a relationship between existence and meaning. The universe is not merely operational, it is purposeful. The completion of creation is not the end of activity, but the beginning of a sustained order in which everything functions according to a deeper logic. When viewed as a whole, the 7 stages form a progression from invisible intention to visible reality. What begins as an unseen will becomes a structured, living, conscious universe. Each layer adds complexity but also clarity, revealing more of the underlying order. The visible world, in this sense, is not independent. It is dependent on and expressive of the invisible foundation from which it emerges. This brings us back to the original metaphysical question: is the universe the beginning or the revelation of something deeper? Within this framework, the answer becomes clear. The universe is not the starting point of existence, but the point at which existence becomes visible. It is the surface of a much deeper reality, one that continues to sustain it, shape it, and give it meaning. As the progression from invisible intention to visible reality reaches completion, a clearer picture of existence begins to emerge, one that is not flat or singular, but layered. Reality, in this framework, is structured across 2 interconnected dimensions, the visible and the invisible. These are not separate worlds in the sense of being isolated or independent. Rather, they are interwoven aspects of a single, unified reality. One is accessible to the senses, measurable and observable. The other operates beneath the surface, shaping meaning, direction, and purpose in ways that cannot be directly perceived. The visible world is the one most familiar to human experience. It is the domain of matter, energy, space, and time, the realm studied by science and navigated through the senses. Everything within it can, in principle, be observed, quantified, and analyzed. From the motion of galaxies to the structure of atoms, from biological systems to human behavior, the visible world presents itself as a network of causes and effects that can be investigated and understood. It is structured, consistent, and governed by laws that allow prediction and control. This is the level of reality where actions produce immediate, tangible outcomes, where physical processes unfold in measurable ways. Yet, despite its clarity and accessibility, the visible world does not fully explain itself. It describes how things happen, but not why they ultimately matter. It provides mechanisms, but not meaning. Patterns can be observed, but their significance remains open to interpretation. This limitation suggests that the visible dimension, while real and essential, is not self-sufficient. It points beyond itself to something deeper, something that cannot be reduced to physical interactions alone. This deeper dimension is what we refer to as the invisible world. Unlike the visible, it cannot be accessed through instruments or senses. It has no measurable dimensions, no physical properties, no location within space. And yet, within the theological and philosophical framework we have been exploring, it is precisely this invisible layer that provides the foundation for meaning, value, and purpose. It is not less real because it cannot be seen. In fact, it may be more fundamental because it defines the significance of everything that is seen. The invisible world operates not through physical causation, but through principles such as intention, truth, and order. It is the realm in which concepts like good and evil, purpose and direction, alignment and separation take on their full meaning. While these cannot be measured in the same way as mass or velocity, they nonetheless shape human experience in profound ways. Decisions are not made purely based on physical necessity. They are influenced by beliefs, values, and internal orientations that belong to this deeper layer of reality. In this sense, the invisible world governs not by force, but by meaning. It does not push or pull objects. It guides choices, frames understanding, and gives context to existence. It is the difference between an action being merely a physical movement and that same action carrying moral or existential weight. A gesture, a word, or a decision may appear small in the visible sense, but within the invisible dimension, it can represent alignment with or departure from a deeper order. These two layers, visible and invisible, are not in conflict. They are complementary. The visible expresses what the invisible contains. The invisible gives direction to what the visible performs. One is the manifestation, the other is the source. When they are understood together, reality becomes coherent. When they are separated, understanding becomes fragmented, either reduced to material processes without meaning or abstracted into ideas without embodiment. It is precisely at the intersection of these two layers that human beings exist. Humans are not purely physical entities, nor are they purely spiritual. They are a synthesis of both. The human body belongs entirely to the visible world. It is subject to biological processes, governed by physical laws, and ultimately limited by time. It grows, changes, and eventually declines. Everything about the body can be observed, measured, and analyzed within the framework of the material universe. At the same time, the human soul belongs to the invisible dimension. It is not composed of matter, does not occupy space, and is not bound by time in the same way as the body. The soul is the seat of consciousness, identity, and intentionality, not merely as neurological processes, but as the deeper sense of self that persists through change. It is through the soul that humans are capable of reflection, of asking questions about meaning, purpose, and existence itself. It is also through the soul that humans relate to the invisible order, through belief, moral awareness, and the capacity for transcendence. This dual nature gives human existence a unique structure. Humans do not merely live in the visible world, they interpret it. They do not simply act, they choose. And those choices are not determined solely by external conditions, but by internal orientations that arise from the invisible dimension. Every human action, therefore, has two aspects: a visible effect and an invisible significance. What is done in the physical world simultaneously shapes the condition of the soul. Because of this, humans function as a bridge between the two dimensions of reality. They translate invisible intentions into visible actions. A thought becomes a word, a belief becomes a decision, a value becomes a pattern of behavior. In this way, the invisible is continuously expressed through the visible, not in abstract terms but in concrete lived experience. At the same time, the visible world feeds back into the invisible, as experiences, choices, and actions influence the internal state of the individual. This bridging role carries a profound implication. Human life is inherently meaningful. Not because meaning is imposed from outside, but because it is embedded in the very structure of existence. To act is not merely to produce an outcome, it is to participate in a larger order. To choose is not only to affect circumstances, but to shape the trajectory of one's own being within the invisible dimension. Seen in this light, existence is no longer divided between what is real and what is imagined, but between what is seen and what gives meaning to what is seen. The visible world provides the stage, but the invisible provides the script. And the human being stands at the center, both actor and interpreter, both participant and observer, navigating a reality that is far deeper than it first appears. If human beings truly stand at the intersection of the visible and invisible dimensions of reality, then every action they take cannot be confined to a single layer of consequence. What appears outwardly as a simple, observable event always carries a deeper, less visible implication. This leads directly to the ethical dimension of existence, where actions are no longer neutral or isolated, but inherently meaningful across two levels at once. On the surface, every action produces a physical effect. A word spoken can influence another person's emotions. A decision made can alter circumstances, relationships, or future outcomes. These are the consequences that can be observed, measured, and often predicted. They belong entirely to the visible world, where cause and effect operate within the framework of time and space. In this domain, actions can be evaluated based on efficiency, impact, or immediate results. But beneath this layer lies a second dimension of consequence, one that is not visible, yet arguably more significant. Every action also shapes the internal state of the individual. It forms habits, reinforces intentions, and gradually defines the orientation of the soul. A choice is never just a moment, it is a movement in a particular direction. Over time, these movements accumulate, forming a trajectory that reflects who a person is becoming, not just what they are doing. This is what gives ethical decisions their weight. The visible outcome may be temporary, but the invisible effect endures. An act of honesty, for example, does more than resolve a situation. It aligns the individual with truth. An act of deception may achieve a short-term advantage, but it introduces a fracture within the internal structure of the self. These effects are not always immediately felt, but they are nonetheless real. They shape perception, influence future choices, and ultimately define the condition of the soul. Within this framework, morality is not imposed from outside as a set of arbitrary rules. It emerges naturally from the structure of reality itself. Actions either align with the deeper order that sustains existence, or they move away from it. This alignment or misalignment is not merely symbolic. It has real consequences within the invisible dimension. Over time, it determines the direction in which a person's inner life is oriented. This leads to one of the most profound implications of the entire framework, the destiny of the soul. If the soul is not bound by physical death, then the trajectory it follows during life does not simply end when the body ceases to function. Instead, it continues. The concepts of heaven and hell can be understood within this context, not as physical locations somewhere in the universe, but as states of being that reflect the soul's orientation. Heaven, in this sense, is not defined by external surroundings, but by relationship. It is the state of complete alignment with the source of existence, the invisible foundation from which all reality flows. It is described as union, harmony, and fulfillment, not because of environmental conditions, but because the soul is fully integrated with the truth and order that define reality at its deepest level. There is no division, no conflict, no separation, only coherence. Hell, by contrast, is the state of separation from that same source. It is not necessarily imposed as a punishment, but emerges as the natural result of sustained misalignment. If a soul consistently turns away from truth, from meaning, from the deeper order of existence, it gradually becomes disconnected from the very foundation that gives it life. This disconnection is experienced as emptiness, fragmentation, and isolation. It is not defined by physical suffering, but by the absence of the very thing that gives existence its coherence. These two states, union and separation, are not arbitrary outcomes assigned at the end of life. They are the continuation of a direction already established. Every choice, every action, every intention contributes to shaping that direction. Life, then, is not a neutral passage of time, but a process of becoming. The question is not simply what happens during life, but what kind of being is formed through it. From this perspective, the meaning of life becomes clearer. Existence is not random, nor is it without structure. It is oriented. There is a direction embedded within reality itself, a movement from potential toward fulfillment, from fragmentation toward unity, from isolation toward connection. Human life participates in this movement, whether consciously or unconsciously. The choices a person makes either align with this direction or resist it. This means that life is not merely about survival, success, or accumulation. Those may be visible markers of activity, but they do not define meaning at its deepest level. Meaning arises from alignment, living in a way that reflects the underlying order of reality. It is found in coherence between what is done outwardly and what is true inwardly. When actions, intentions, and understanding are aligned, life takes on a sense of clarity and purpose that cannot be reduced to external achievement. In this context, faith is often misunderstood. It is not blind belief in the absence of evidence, nor is it the rejection of reason. Rather, it is a way of perceiving reality that includes both the visible and the invisible dimensions. Faith recognizes that what can be measured is not the totality of what exists. It is an interpretive framework, a lens through which the deeper structure of reality becomes intelligible. To live by faith, then, is not to ignore the visible world, but to see it more fully. It is to understand that every moment carries more significance than it appears to. It is to act with the awareness that choices resonate beyond immediate outcomes. Faith does not eliminate uncertainty, but it provides orientation. It allows a person to navigate existence with a sense of direction, grounded in something deeper than circumstance. As this exploration comes to a close, the central message becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. Reality is more than what is seen. The visible world, for all its complexity and detail, is only one layer of a much larger structure. To rely solely on what can be observed is to engage with existence at a surface level, missing the depth that gives it meaning. This does not require rejecting the visible, but recontextualizing it. The physical world remains real, important, and worthy of study. But it is not self-explanatory. It points beyond itself, toward a deeper order that cannot be captured by measurement alone. Recognizing this does not diminish reality, it expands it. And so the invitation is not merely to believe, but to consider, to question whether every action, no matter how small, carries a significance that extends beyond what can be seen. To reflect on the possibility that human life is not confined to a single dimension, but unfolds across both the visible and the invisible at once. If that is true, then nothing is truly insignificant. Every choice matters. Every moment contributes to a larger pattern, and every person, whether aware of it or not, is participating in a reality far deeper than it first appears.